All right. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me on this Sunday morning. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. Today, we will cover how to reduce tightness and feel your best without wasting time static stretching. Again, nothing is a complete waste of time. However, there are much better ways to go about it, and hopefully we'll explain that thoroughly in the webinar today. Before we get started, do me a favor. If you can silence any technology around you, cell phones, TVs, computers. A lot of important details in here. I want to make sure you get the most from the content. Next, locate the Q&A button. So somewhere on your screen, depending on how you're watching this webinar, whether it's on a phone, a tablet, or a computer, you will see a panel or settings, settings tab or something that you can click somewhere. If you have questions as we go through the webinar at any point, click the Q&A button and input that question in there. If you have anything right now before we get started, I want to make sure we touch on, I would add something in there as soon as you can. I will be raffling off one entry into this brand new program. So I'm kicking off a brand new program called Function Over Fitness, which will launch January 10th of next year. So just under 1 month from now. At the end of the webinar, you have to be present on the webinar to enter. This is a 6-week program. Focusing primarily here, if we look at some different things, prioritizing function of the body in addition to achieving your health and fitness goals. So kind of like looking at some of the things we're talking about today with the webinar, we want to make sure we're not just losing weight, we're not just getting stronger, we're improving how the body functions in the process, because we want sustainability and longevity within our functional movement program, so we can move. I like this picture the most because as I was looking through graphics for this, I thought, okay, there's more to this than just strength and losing weight. Is this woman going to be able to play with this little guy 20, 30, 40 years from now, run up and down stairs, run around, go to a sporting event, be there for him in some way? So I like the function aspect of things because it allows us just to live our life to the fullest extent. This will be an individualized 6-week training program. You have the ability to add on a running plan, add on weekly one-on-one sessions, nutrition coaching. But goal with this is just a sustainable long-term plan. So I don't want this to be 6 weeks. Come January, you're done and that's it because you're burned out. This is something that you can continue to tweak the dials and see long-term success with moving forward. If for some reason you cannot stay on the webinar for the entire time, I will be sending the replay out tomorrow at 11 a.m. So just kind of stay tuned on that if you have to sign up today early for whatever reason. Now, my name is Garrett McLaughlin. Like I mentioned, I'll be your tour guide today. I can't do this for you. However, I can guide you throughout the process, which is what I do with my clients. I'm a licensed athletic trainer, strength conditioning coach, and also do a type of manual therapy called active release techniques, or ART. Pretty beneficial from a soft tissue range of motion standpoint. So pretty relevant in this situation as well. I run 2 programs. First one being the healthy running program, and the second being the functionally fit program. Essentially, these are the exact same programs, just 2 different audiences, right? Helping runners, helping the general population, people with a history of injuries, or people that really want to prioritize function of their body in addition to their health and fitness goals, just to again, continue to move their best and follow more of a function-based longevity approach. To get us started here, I think we're asking the wrong questions, right? We're always saying my blank is tight. How do I stretch it, right? This is the complete wrong way to go about things, right? What we need to start asking, is my hamstring actually tight? Does it feel tight, or is something else going on? And then in addition to that, in what movements or positions am I missing in my daily routine? One thing it's super interesting, we all feel the need, and I think we feel neglectful to a degree. Hey, I'm not stretching enough. I don't know what to do. So can you give me some stretches? Like, do we need stretching? If our daily routine, our life, our activities, what we're doing on a regular basis allows us to move through the range of motion, it preserves that range of motion as we age. We technically don't need stretching in any way, right? We preserve range of motion. But what you tend to see here with all the technology, with the change in our routine, as we start to get older, working jobs, sitting longer, driving in the car, commuting kids back and forth, or what have you, right? We spend more time sitting, less time being active, and just the decline of the human body 1 decade at a time. That's when we start to get tight. So our job is to understand, why are we feeling tight? Am I missing something in my daily routine? Do I need to remove certain positions from my daily routine? If I can go from a sit down desk to a stand up desk, that might be half the battle for some of you. Others might just need to start doing other activities that work on preserving or improving that range of motion. And then we add stretching and mobility and all that stuff on top of it. We tend to do this the wrong way. We add things. We add, hey, can I stretch for 3 sets of 30 seconds on my hamstrings, but I'm sitting for 8 to 10 hours a day. Okay, so it's almost like it just doesn't make sense to me. So understanding the big picture, I think, is the most important thing I want you to get from the webinar today, because sometimes adding basic stretches and drills just is not enough if our lifestyle is directly creating that tightness. What I want you to learn today, let me get rid of this bar on the bottom of the screen here. And if you, okay. There's some panels on here. I want to make sure that they don't get in your way because they tend to cause a little gray box on your end. But what I want you to learn today, the science behind range of motion. We'll talk about some reasons why you might feel tight. Is that actually tightness? How to self-assess this tightness to uncover the root cause. And then what are some of the most effective drills to address your problem areas? Again, most effective way is to not need these in the first place. So really creating and following a lifestyle that preserves, if not improves, your range of motion naturally, and then using these drills to supplement from there. So the science behind range of motion. Cool. Question is, do you feel stiff, right? A lot of us say, I'm tight, I need a stretch. Is that actually tightness, like you're restricted moving through the range of motion, or just your muscles and joints feel stiff? These are two different things, right? We have limited range of motion, or we feel tight. We need to differentiate between the two a little bit better. Is this a muscular endurance or stabilization issue? So if we look at, and especially a lot of the clients that I deal with, we look at runners, right? We say, hey, after mile 8, my hamstring tightens up, my calf tightens up. I don't feel it any other time, but after I get past that certain mileage, I've taxed my body to that degree. That's when things start to kind of bark at me a little bit. We might not be looking at a flexibility issue. You didn't have any other issues at any other point up until that degree of training. Maybe it's endurance, maybe it's stabilization, maybe your form is breaking down, your mechanics are breaking down and adding strain on other tissues. So there's a lot of different reasons why you might feel tight, rather than it always being something that you need to stretch. Do you need to strengthen? Do you need to stabilize? Do you need to improve mechanics, running form? All these different factors really need to be considered. But then really thinking about, what does your day-to-day activities look like? Who are you, right? Where do you fit into this? Are you the mother here that's doing a great job playing with her kid, holding the kid overhead, throwing the kids in the air, going to the playground, doing different activities and being active in some way, moving through the range of motion and really using your body to the fullest extent? Are you the guy at the bottom left there that's sitting at a desk in a, again, suboptimal position for 8 to who knows how many hours per day, and then you get home, you eat dinner, you sit in a chair, you drive home from work, you sit on the couch and watch Jeopardy, Wheel of Fortune, right? Who are you here? Obviously, we see some of these carpenters, construction workers at the top right, who are, again, challenging their body, moving through the range of motion. Not saying they don't necessarily need to stretch, but we need to consider what our daily activities look like, because this dictates function of the human body to a great degree. We're doing these things 5 to 7 days a week for years and years, right? 30, 40, 50 years. Sometimes we're doing these jobs. So making sure we're doing things that are going to preserve, if not improve, range of motion, to make sure we don't need a lot of this additional stretching and things or what have you. Now, flexibility, right? Tightness itself is not all about the muscle. This is what we tend to think, right? If you look at the person on the left side of the screen there, we're going to look at that first picture and say, this person's hamstrings are tight, right? We rarely consider the joint and the joint capsule, which are all the ligaments and the tissues that really passively stabilize that joint. The neurovascular structures, which are the nerve, veins, and arteries. Those things have to glide and slide as we move. If there's some kind of restriction there where our muscles guarding to protect them. Neuromuscular control is more so the brain and the nerves, how those send signals and control our overall movement. They allow our muscles to relax. They allow our muscles to contract. They create movement throughout the body. This is almost like computer processor behind it all. Sometimes we have stored memories of pain, of injury, of fear, of different things that limit our movement. So we really need to tap into that as well. Like I mentioned before, strength, endurance, and mechanics are also important to take into consideration. If a muscle is not strong enough for the task at hand, it will naturally feel tight, right? It's going to break down. It's going to fatigue a little bit more quickly. So that can create tightness. I don't necessarily want to stretch that muscle. It can do the activity. It just can't do that many repetitions of the activity. So this is what I see a lot of times with runners is we don't necessarily need to improve a whole lot of range of motion in a mid-range sport like running. We need to get stronger, improve endurance and mechanics, right? To run in a more economical way. And naturally, tightness just goes away or improves, right? And then breathing patterns. This is huge. Breathing is this underlying system, right? We have our lungs, we have our diaphragm, we have all of these other muscles that help get air in and out of the system. If we're breathing in a poor way, we are creating more excess tension. Some of these secondary or accessory breathing muscles have to work a little bit harder. Scalenes, upper traps, levator scap, right? Intercostal. Some of these things really have to work a lot harder. That creates tension and tone throughout the system. And also, if you have done meditation before, you can see the amount of relaxation, how well you can reduce tension, reduce stress just through breathing. So really considering, are you breathing in an efficient manner, which will help you actually improve range of motion, reduce tightness, tension, and stiffness throughout the system. This is a picture. I know I've shown this before. Those of you that have seen a webinar I've done, it might have been earlier this year, actually. Had the opportunity a lifetime ago here. I think that we're looking 8 years ago at this point. This is the Southeast Junior USA Triathlon team. They do weekends multiple times a year, just in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So we had a chance to go down and work with some of these athletes. This was the very end of the entire weekend, right? We did a strength training program, worked in this beautiful facility. And we finished with breathing, right? The athletes, people, right? We're so used to adding things and thinking about it has to be harder, or I need to do more. Sometimes we need to take the foot off the gas pedal. We need to take a step back. We need to breathe. We need to relax. We need to facilitate that recovery process, allow our tissues to calm down, to reduce tension and reduce tone. Sometimes that's what's needed for a lot of people, right? So never overlooking breathing, because that can be one of the underlying things beneath it all. But the factors which truly matter the most, rather than thinking more is better, do you have enough range of motion to complete the desired task? Do you have enough active controls, like you can control your body as you go into that range of motion, strength and endurance to do that motion multiple times in a row, in the stability to perform the task with good quality, right? If you lack any of those things, naturally you're going to feel tight as a side effect, because you're going to be stressing a tissue kind of beyond its limit. And then you need to consistently, on a regular basis, most likely daily, move your muscles and joints in a way that preserves and or provides access to the range of motion required. A lot of times what I see and what we'll talk about in a second is people are stretching, they're doing things, and then they're going and they're sitting back down at their desk, right? I'm glad you're doing that, but a small amount of stretching isn't going to counteract 8 to 10 hours sitting at a desk or doing something else that's actually causing you to be tight. You need to understand what things you can remove, right? What triggers, what stimulus is actually creating that tightness. Sometimes that is the most important step. One of the most important things I've learned, actually back in like 2012, I think I did it was a 3-day Perform Better Summit in Chicago. And there was talk about, just as a society, we have this notion that in order to fix something or get better, we need to add. Sometimes it could be remove, right? How do we remove that stimulus that's creating that tension, creating that tightness? That is the most important thing you should consider, rather than always adding things. And there's no more time in the day for anything else, right? We always want to add things, but how can you remove that most harmful stimulus that's creating that tension? In order to understand your tightness, we need to go through some type of assessment process. So these are basic self-assessments. This is actually when I work with clients. I work with clients, I see them in the facility in person. I see some people in person. Also, it's like a hybrid model that they're going to do most of their stuff on their own, but they do their evaluations with me. Other people, it's just strictly online. But we try not to just look at personal goals and create that program. Hey, I want to strengthen my upper body and core. I want to PR for my upcoming half marathon, right? Those things are great. We can easily do those things, but those are performance goals. We need to understand what are your movement related goals underneath that, which a lot of people aren't aware of. So what we do is we actually assess the body. We look at your range of motion. We look at your strength, your endurance, your stability, your movement quality. We want to identify what are your strengths and weaknesses? What is your body actually telling us? In addition to achieving those personal goals, how do we add exercises into there that work towards those performance goals, but also allow you to move and function better in the process, right? This is the biggest part of that function over fitness program that I'm talking about coming up in January. Let me just see, quick question here. Beth, we're going to talk about that in 1 second. Someone else also had that question. What can I do to eliminate the neuromuscular disconnect? And if you could elaborate on that 1 second, what does that truly mean to you? Because there's a section in here that I'm going to cover something that's pretty much along those lines. So just stay tuned. But as we start to look at the self-assessments here, we want to know in a very objective manner, are you actually tight? What is your body telling us? We know through research, we have certain degrees of motion that we want to be able to get through. Obviously, it's very task specific. If I'm not a gymnast and doing handstands, do I need to get my arms all the way up overhead like this? Probably not. But I still want to lift my baby up in the air. I still want to put something in the cabinet, right? So we need to understand how much range of motion do we actually need. More is not better. But having enough to function and feel your best is important. So this is the back to ground shoulder flexion. We look to see engaging the core, rib cage down, keeping that neutral lumbar spine. Can I reach my arms up overhead to touch the thumbs to the ground? This is telling me if I have enough shoulder flexion, right? Very black and white. If someone said my shoulders are tight and I ran through this here and I found out you can do that, okay, we probably need to strengthen you or stabilize you or work on your quality of movement because you don't have a restriction in range of motion. This is the seated thoracic spine rotation. This is working on thoracic, so mid to upper back rotation. This is where I'm tight. So you can see here looking, can I actually touch that PVC pipe to the wall? If you were sitting in a doorway and you were facing that wall, I cannot to either side. This is where I've been tightest my entire life. Does it affect me in any way? No, it doesn't. Do I work on it? Yes, I do. It just takes me a small amount of time, again, adding into my strength training program, some movement prep, maybe a cool down. I still work on this on a regular basis because I want to make sure I'm not losing more range of motion at the thoracic spine. However, this, you can see just that positive test right there. Next up, we have ankles, right? Ankles and calf flexibility, super important at the lower body, especially for runners, one of the most important ranges of motion to have. Can I keep that foot flat on the ground, lunge the knee forward? The toe should be at 4 inches to the ground. If I'm tight, you can see right there, that heel is starting to just kind of peek off the ground there. That means there's a limitation in ankle range of motion. So we try our best to make objective decisions. We look at things objectively. We create objective programs. We also still filter in that subjective. What are you feeling? I ask people all the time, hey, what are you feeling as you complete this exercise? Oh, I feel this. Okay, that's interesting, right? It provides us more information. There are some people that I deal with, and I was talking to a woman about 2-3 weeks ago. She said, hey, Garrett, you removed that hamstring stretch, right? For a while, she had a limited hamstring range of motion. We retested her. She no longer had limited range of motion. So we added in drills to strengthen that full range of motion. But she just thought, hey, I need to continue to do that forever. Once you get to a point where you improve that range of motion to the degree you need, we work on building strength around that range of motion rather than continuing to stretch it, right? If I can strengthen it, I'm creating a better process or pathway within the brain and that neuromuscular system. So then I can use and have more access to that range of motion rather than just stretching into it and then going about my day. Let's see if Beth Ann didn't respond yet. So these are things we look at. Obviously, I cannot show you everything for the entire body because we'd be here probably for 3 days looking at every single joint. But biggest thing is to be as objective as possible. We want to know what our range of motion looks like, because it's very easy to say my hamstrings are tight, my back is tight. What does that mean? Do I actually have limited range of motion? Do I feel stiff, right? These are the questions you to ask. Limited range of motion, can't go through that range of motion. Do I just feel stiff? Do I have poor strength, endurance, or quality of movement? Or am I compensating in some way that's overstressing that area of the body, that muscle or that joint? So this is the checklist that I run through, right? As we evaluate people. And what's something you can do on your own, right? How far can you actively move the joint? You saw in the picture here, and I'll go backwards. You can see this discrepancy here on the left side. This guy, if you look at the bottom, his hip, we'll say his hamstring here, to simplify, his hip and his hamstring allows us to get all the way up to 80, 90 degrees or so, right, of hip flexion. he can only lift himself up to 60 degrees of hip flexion. He has the flexibility and range of motion. He just, for some reason, cannot actively lift his leg all the way up on his own. This person probably feels tight. He wants to stretch his hamstring, but his hamstring's not the issue. He probably has some type of neuromuscular issue, weakness in the hip flexor, poor core stabilization, right? There are multiple things that are probably creating this, but you can see at the bottom, he can get the range of motion. He just can't access it. So you don't want to waste your time stretching that. You want to try to retrain the underlying reason why that's the case. Okay. So that's very important to look at. Hard to know on your own. Like if you were doing this and you say, hey, my hamstrings are tight, you lay on your back. I want you to lift up, put a strap around the foot, a band or rope, lift your leg up as high as it can. Try to make sure both legs are parallel in line. You're in good position. How high can you lift that leg? And then remove that strap or that passive assistance. And then what I want you to do is to lift your leg up on your own. Can you get to the same degree? If there's a big discrepancy, right? It's probably not a flexibility issue. It's probably something else going on, which is often common. Getting the head back here. Okay. So active range of motion, passive range of motion. You need to look at both of those. That tells us a whole lot about our range of motion if we're feeling tight somewhere. And then as you go through that motion or just normally move, do you feel a tissue stretch? So as that guy lifted his leg up, did he feel like his hamstrings were tight as he went up? Did he feel it in the front of the hip? Was there any type of pain, numbness, and tingling, right? These things tend to give us a lens into actually what's going on there. Is it a muscular issue? Is it a joint issue? Is it an injury, right? Is it a hamstring tendinopathy? Is it numbness and tingling? It's a hamstring tightening up for a sciatic nerve issue or a herniated disc or something else. Looking more beyond our tightness because the body's pretty smart. The body will tend to lay down this tightness in a way that protects prevents future injury. So understanding, is this a protective mechanism or is there something else going on there? And then also, how is strength and endurance of that tissue or joint? Does this person really weak through their hip? Are they unable to stabilize their core so their pelvis does not have the solid ground in which to lift that leg, right? There are other reasons why it's hard to lift your leg beyond just the muscle group is tight. So understanding if that's also the case. And then there's poor control of your movement, creating more stress on a particular joint or tissue. I see some people that we get them to do a single leg exercise, like, ooh, as I go down, man, that's really tight in my IT band. That's really tight in my knee. It's because they're just not moving in a good way, right? Their knees collapsing, they're losing stability, their body is shifting in some way that's placing all that stress through the joint. It feels like tightness, but it's compensation. So this is the checklist that we tend to go through with most people just to identify where is that problem area. Because a lot of people that I see, I'll work with them, we'll do an evaluation. Some will do one-on-one sessions depending on the person. Other people will be more remote. So as they say, hey, Garrett, you know what? My shoulder's been feeling a little bit tight. Like, all right, let's go back to the evaluation. All right, you had full range of motion. You were weak here. Okay, so what I'm thinking is it's not tightness of your shoulder, it's this. Or it might say, yeah, you know what, you're tight there. Let's add something else to address that. It wasn't an issue then, but probably as we add more training, it could be an issue now. So doing that evaluation, really understanding is super important. And then I got a question here. So now to speed up turnover, forgets where to land while running. So Beth Ann, it's funny because I work with Beth Ann, who's not supposed to be running, but asked the running question. One leg doesn't know to speed up turnover, forgets where to land while running. So I'm trying to fix my pointer here. So sometimes from a neuromuscular standpoint, right, if we haven't done something for a period of time, naturally we lose the ability to do it efficiently. So we need to retrain that. So when it comes to coming back from injuries, specifically a hip injury that you haven't been running, drills like, and this is part of the retraining process that you would naturally go through, because I know Beth Ann's situation, so I can speak very personally about it. Going from a rehab standpoint to then progressing to marching, to then progressing to skipping, and then going to run walk intervals, like naturally this process will just work itself out over time. A lot of times, I think biggest thing I see with the rehab process, people wonder, like, they just jump back into it. Like, here, I'm rehabbing this injury. I haven't been able to run or do my activity that I want to get back to. I jump back and do that. And almost you feel like a you feel like a baby deer, right? It feels really unnatural again, just because we need almost, my again mentor years ago used to say, we need to knock the rust off a little bit, right? We lose these pathways to a degree. They're very quick to come back when we give it the right stimulus, but we just need to slowly and progressively over time start to introduce those movements in again, start to retrain those, and things just come back. So the process will really work itself out naturally. Now let me remove this panel again. Okay, so understanding your tightness, going back to what is that underlying reason, rather than saying I need to stretch my back, hamstring, or IT band, or whatever, enter any other area of the body, neck, shoulder, ankle, toe, it doesn't matter. What are you doing on a daily basis? So you can see here, as move this panel too, I got another panel in the way, panels everywhere on the screen. You can see the guy on the left side of the screen. He says, hey, my back is tight. Why is his back tight? Every day he goes to pick up the mail. He has an Amazon box waiting at the front door. He just aimlessly bends over to pick up the mail. He can actually get down. Look at him. Like, he can get down and touch the ground with his fingertips. Does he need more flexibility because his low back is tight? Does he need to stretch that? No, probably not. He needs to either teach himself how to do this with better mechanics, or he needs to strengthen these muscles so as he gets down in that position, he's not overstressing those tissues, right? So I wouldn't necessarily tell this guy he needs to stretch, because he can do the task well. I would train him how to do it in a more effective manner. Let's teach him how to squat. Let's teach him how to hinge at the hips. Let's get him stronger in the hamstrings, in the glutes, in the lower back, so he's not overloading those tissues. That would probably help his back tightness. This girl here, you can see big arch at the lower back, not huge, but you can just see this with that space and that light behind the back. For her, as she lifts her arms up overhead, she naturally feels this compression right at the lumbar spine and lower back area. So for her, we would, instead of stretching her back, most likely we need to teach her how to get more range of motion at the shoulders. We need to teach her how to breathe and get the rib cage down, stabilize the core. All of those things will take the stress out of the lower back. This guy here says my hamstrings are tight, sits at the desk all day on his computer, head forward, hunched, really kind of in a slouched position in his chair. Let's try to get him in a better position. Let's stand up. Let's get a stand-up desk. Let's strengthen some of these muscles that are going to be put on stress, right? Even sitting, right? These tissues are going to be stressed to a degree. Can we strengthen those muscles and build them up? This person at the bottom of the screen might feel some hamstring tightness as well, from a different reason, not from being inactive, but for being overly active, maybe overstriding, landing too far in front. So if I worked on stretching the hamstrings, but didn't realize, hey, this person's overstriding, and as they land too far in front, all the stress goes directly into the hamstring. I can stretch them all day long, but they're still going to go out and run whatever many miles. We might have to let's just correct their running form to get them to land in a better position underneath the body center of mass. That might eliminate the tightness. IT band, an area I see a lot of. Pelvic control, single leg stability. Losing or lacking these two things here tends to put a lot of stress on that lateral thigh and knee. So rather than thinking stretch the IT band, which we generally are not going to get much range of motion from, just because it's such a strong, dense tissue that's actually attached the whole length of the femur, can we work on improving single leg stability, improve pelvic control, improve those things which will naturally improve or reduce the amount of tension that they're going to feel through the IT band. Okay. Now, from a strategy to improve range of motion, first we need to focus on getting out of those positions, right? I've said that multiple times. Identifying what are those positions which are creating tightness. That is the most important thing you can do. If you did nothing else and nothing else you learned here, I would get a journal and I would go through your daily basis, keep a small little journal, piece of paper or something, go through your day and you just jot some notes down. Like, oh man, I'm sitting at my desk, 9:30 a.m., lower back feels tight. Been sitting since 7. Okay, like that's important to know. Is the lower back the issue, or is the sitting the issue, right? Is it my flexibility or is it my position? In addition, we want to add some type of movement, right? Remove the harmful stimulus or the trigger of your tightness, add something that's going to allow you to move through your body's full range of motion. So this is called CARS, controlled articular rotations. It's what it's called. This is created by Dr. Andrew Espina here, who says you can't move where you can't move, right? Very obvious comment, but a lot of times we try to push our bodies to a point where it's just not ready to go. He created what's called functional range conditioning, which is an approach that addresses range of motion, addresses joint health, creates better quality of movement. The biggest thing is you need to do these things every single day. If it matters to you, if it's truly affecting you, we can't offset our lifestyle unless we're doing enough of that addition, or we remove what that stimulus is and we can do more of this. But we need to be smart of doing these things most days just to see a significant benefit. CARs, or controlled articular rotations, are ways we can move our joints, isolate every joint specifically, and move that joint throughout its full multi-directional range of motion. One of the biggest issues I see with stretching is we stretch the same way day in and day out. We stretch our hamstring by putting our feet together and hinging down to the ground, just rounding into that position. Okay, that lengthens specific muscle fibers, but you ever see what our muscle fibers look like, right? We have different angles to them. They have different lines and go in different directions. They rotate our joint, they flex, they extend, they move it horizontally, right? Our fibers move in different ways. So we start to consider that the geometry of our tissue is not so linear, and we move and challenge ourselves in multiple ranges of motion and multiple directions, that's when we tend to see good benefits in terms of flexibility, reducing tightness, or just controlling a joint. Now, as we run through a couple of these, just to give you some suggestions here, and you can YouTube these like crazy if you wanted, any area of the body. If you say, hey, hip, neck, wrist, right? I have people with carpal tunnel syndrome and that sit at the desk all day, they do wrist CARs or elbow CARs or whatever, just to preserve that range of motion. Moving slowly throughout that range of motion, flexion, rotation, lateral flexion, extension, where we barely spend any time, very important for the neck, lateral flexion, rotation, coming back into flexion, and then back down, right? Very simple. For the neck, something I do on a regular basis myself. Shoulders, tricky for a lot of people, coming across the body, flexion, rotation, internal rotation, extension, coming down by the side, full internal rotation, extension, and we're just reversing. We're going through this full multi-directional range of motion. Come back into external rotation, horizontal adduction, back down, right? This is exploring almost every range of motion throughout the shoulder. You'll be able to see where you're limited, pops, clicks, little issues in the joint, which a lot of people tend to feel. So moving through this full range of motion will help you preserve that range of motion, improve the strength and the control of your range of motion, and also teach you a thing or two, right? What do you actually need to address on what's the tight or limiting factor? Because there are going to be certain positions throughout here that you're going to notice will be the weak links or the tighter points. Spine CARs, flexion, rotation, slow, mindful, lateral flexion, the tilt to the side, extension as I rotate back, full extension, coming back around, rotation, lateral flexion, right? If you're doing this in a slow and controlled manner, these are pretty tricky to do. One of the biggest things you'll see, and especially as we get into hip CARs, shoulder CARs, you'll see me do a little bit more. You see the fist out to the side. That's me trying to actually create some stiffness and tension throughout the system. I'm irradiating. I'm actually gripping down through that fist. I'm creating tension in the core, in the shoulder. The more tension I can create through other joints means the more stability I can create to move this hip throughout its full range of motion. So I'm trying to irradiate as much as possible to create tension, and then I'm moving throughout that full range of motion. So these are different CARs, which you can do on a regular basis. When I did this course, they actually talked about having a morning routine or a daily routine. It's identifying what are those joints you need to work on. Every morning you get up, you spend 5 to 10 minutes, you move through that range of motion, right? We can't expect to preserve or improve our range of motion unless we do it on a regular basis. So just having some go-to drills that you can challenge these areas regularly. This is almost like catch-all, right? We're addressing all of the range of motion around the shoulder, all of it around the hip. We're not just isolating, oh, my shoulder's tight, I'm just going to stretch in this position that stretches that one tissue. Like, we're getting everything in terms of tissues, muscles, tendons. We're getting the joints. We're teaching ourselves how to control that range of motion as well in the process. Do I think you're going to improve range of motion a whole lot by doing this? No, probably not. This is going to move you through what your body already has, but sometimes that's what a lot of people need. We lack control of our tissues and our joints because we just don't go through that range of motion in this manner. This will provide that for you. If we're actually looking to increase range of motion, we like to implement what's called, and let me just check here if I have any questions. I don't. we want to complete what's called pails and rails. So pails and rails are actually adding this more contractile components, more neuromuscular components to different stretches, right? So we're still getting into a static stretch if you want to look at it that way, right? I'm stretching my hamstring, my calf, my posterior chain. I'm hinging forward. I'm holding that stretch for 2 minutes. I'm going to sit there until that muscle starts to relax and I'm in a nice stable position. And then over 15 seconds, what I'm going to do is actively dig that heel into the bench. I'm going to actually contract the hamstring, the calf, and that posterior chain. Those tissues are in a lengthened position. This is called the pales contraction, sorry. So I'm going to contract that tissue, drive down in there. I'm telling this tissue in a lengthened position, hey, it's okay to be there. You know, I don't have to use, some people you see to get into some positions, their muscles start twitching and guarding a little bit. I'm actively controlling this range of motion and driving down to tell my body, right, that neuromuscular system, it's okay to be in that position. I'm going to hold that for 15 seconds as I build up an intensity, 0, 20, 30, 40, 60, 80, depending on how much you can tolerate based on the tissue. After 15 seconds, I'm actually going to engage the opposite tissue, my hip flexor and my abs, and I'm going to try to pull or hinge myself deeper into a stretch position. You can see me starting to hinge forward. I'm relaxing that hamstring and posterior chain. I'm engaging the hip flexor and the core, and I'm actually being now able to pull myself deeper in the range of motion where I wasn't able to go before, right? So adding this contractile component to some of your stretches, even though I'm showing you specific ones right now, you could do this with anything. It doesn't matter what the stretch is. Like, it's not like it has to be these ones in this way. Like, you could technically do all of your stretches you're doing right now, but add in these components to it. 2-minute stretch, 15-second contraction of the stretched tissue, 15-second contraction of the opposite tissue, 30-second holding that stretch at the end. It's a 3-minute stretch per side, which is no joke. So I definitely recommend figuring out what are your priority areas. If you're doing a whole routine of stretching and mobility right now, adding this would take you hour, 2 hours to do. Find out what are those 1 to 2 things that you really need to isolate and improve, and then use this sequence for that. Okay. Again, improving range of motion, improving that neuromuscular control aspect, improving strength and endurance, and teaching your brain and the nervous system how to function better at the end range of motion, which is part of the reason that guy earlier, he only can get to 60 degrees of hip flexion as opposed to 90. His brain didn't allow him to get there. He didn't know how to control that range of motion. So his body didn't want to put him in a position he couldn't control. He had it. He just couldn't actively do it. That's what we're developing here. We're developing that range of motion, but also developing that active control strength in that range of motion. These other two, hip external rotation. This is the 90-90 position here. A lot of people do in pigeon. You can do the same thing in pigeon as well. Holding that stretch for 2 minutes. I'm tall. I'm hinging forward to find my stretch position. For 15 seconds, I'm going to drive my knee, my shin down into the ground, actively ramp up intensity. Then I'm going to engage that hip flexor in that core and pull myself. You can see pulling myself deeper into that position, but I'm actively doing this and contracting these muscles and actually building up some good intensity. This is tough. And then for 30 seconds, I'm going to breathe. You see the struggle face going on there. I breathe and I relax and I sit in that position, a deeper range of motion. Okay. At the bottom here, we have the hip extension pails and rails. This is looking at hip flexor and quad primarily. Half kneeling stretch, establish your position, getting into a stretch. So I feel the hip flexor in the quad, holding for 2 minutes. I'm going to actually try to drive this bottom knee forward. I'm going to dig into the mat and pull forward, engage the quad and the hip flexor, actively engaging those stretched tissues for 15 seconds. Then I'm going to engage the glute and drive that back toe into the ground as if I'm pushing the mat away from me behind. I'm engaging those opposite tissues. And then I'm going to sink deeper into that range of motion, right? 30 seconds hold at the very end. Sequence is always the same. Doesn't matter the stretch, the position. If you just add this onto a handful of your current static stretches, this would be huge for you. 2-minute stretch, 15 minutes contract to the stretch tissue, 15 minutes contract to the opposite tissue, 30-second stretch at the very end, 3 minutes in duration, right? Takes a lot longer than normal static stretching, but the benefit will far outweigh that. What most people are missing, though, is once they finish their stretching or their mobility in some way, they're missing teaching their body how to then control that range of motion. Luckily, the pails and rails automatically does that for us. But if you're doing a static stretch, like I'm doing a hamstring stretch and I'm just hanging down, reaching for my toes, feeling that stretch in my hamstrings, right? It typically feels pretty good. But when I stand up, now no longer my hamstring stretch position. I go on throughout my day. How do I teach my body how to then be more aware and more conscious of this position, right? That's the whole neuromuscular aspect we need to develop. We want to strengthen this range of motion, teach us how to control the range of motion and really have access to that. If not, we're working on stretching, but we're not actually teaching ourselves how to use that newfound range of motion if we're actually developing some. Here you can see the same position as before. As we go into that hamstring stretch, I'm flexing the hip, hamstrings in a lengthened position. I'm lifting that foot off the table, engaging the muscles around the hip, teaching my hamstring. Sorry, I must have put the wrong video in, video error. Okay, I made it a little bit harder. So put the heel on that, made it harder for myself. I moved it up rather than change my position. I'm teaching my hamstring how to function in a more lengthened position. Technically strengthen the hip flexor, but I'm teaching that hamstring and that hip and that whole posterior chain, hey, I have control of this range of motion. You can use it, right? It's there for you to use. I know how to use it. I'm programming that within the brain and the nervous system. These are the little things we need to do more of. We need to add these after we're doing some type of stretching or mobility, because this allows us to really use that range of motion and make it accessible. If not, we're temporarily and probably improving range of motion. That's what you see foam rolling a lot of times. We're improving range of motion for 10 to 12 minutes after foam rolling, but then we go on with our day. Having this sequence of opening up range of motion, teaching us how to access or strengthen that range of motion. This right here is something I would do after the pigeon stretch or the 90-90 hip external rotation I showed you before. Get into external rotation, hold, and then teach myself actually how to hold that position over time. Not easy. Hip extension lift off. I would do this if I would have hip flexor or quad tightness or trouble getting the hip into extension. I open up those tissues first, then I teach my body how to move into that position. How do I get more hip extension? This is a level 3 variation, which is too hard for me. I have a handful of people doing this right now, but you can see I'm not getting, look at the hip, right? As I lift off, I'm not getting even much range of motion there at all. As I lift off, this is just beyond my means. But we can do this anywhere in the body. So this is just some examples of the shoulder internal rotation, external rotation, flexion. A lot of people are tight and restricted in their shoulders. Don't notice it as much because we do so much walking up and down stairs things. Maybe we reach into a cabinet. Maybe we throw a football with our kid or do something like that. We don't notice the upper body as much as we do lower body half the time. That's why most people complain about hip, hamstring, calf tightness and those things. But pails and rails, again, you have your 2-minute stretch, 15-second contract, 15-second contract the opposite tissue, and then 30-second stretch. This is teaching how to move, internally rotate the shoulder, externally rotate the shoulder, flex the shoulder, and you can see these positions, right? A little bit different than normal positions that a lot of people aren't getting into on a regular basis when they do stretching. But so you can see walking up the PVC pipe here, right here, walking up the PVC pipe to get more flexion. I'm using these tools to help improve range of motion, getting in a good position where I can really engage the core, engage the body, stay stable, and move through that. Rather than just holding these positions, it becomes more of an active drill than anything else. Once again, what you're missing, we need to teach ourselves how to control this deeper range of motion. So we're getting into internal rotation. This is a passive range hold. I'm getting to the end range of motion. I'm lifting my hand. I'm teaching myself how do I hold and actually move and control that end range of motion, so that hand does not come back with the tension of that shoulder, tension of those muscles. The hand would want to come back. I'm actively controlling it at the end range of motion. External rotation, lift off, flexion, lift off. You can see here, same exact position as the pails and rails earlier, nothing changed, but now all I'm trying to do is teach myself how to move into that end range, that range of motion, to teach my brain and the nervous system I have access to that. So I'm doing these lift offs. I'm getting to the end range, and then I'm just trying to lift off an inch. These really make you work, right? The tissues have to work super hard at the end range of motion to get this, especially if you're limited. These are very hard drills to do, but the range of motion they'll give you is huge. Again, not just range of motion, less tightness to feel less tightness. we're giving you range of motion that you can actually use and have access to. Okay. So what we need to do a better job of is getting out of these positions, right? I have no problem if you still do these, if you incorporate them, if you like them, just realize, add more of an active component, adjust your daily routine to remove whatever that stimulus or trigger is that's creating your tightness. Something like this, if I just stretch the hamstrings, and this woman you can see here, if I don't even know if she is, I do see a lot of people like this. I say, hey, what do you feel? Oh, my hamstrings feel really tight. Like her hands are all the way over her shoes. She probably does not have tight hamstrings in any way, but she always feels tight in her hamstring. So understanding, am I tight or do I feel tight? Okay, really differentiating between that. Do I need to improve range of motion or do I need to strengthen, build more control of that range of motion? This would be very important for her, especially in most people out there. And then try to make some of the drills you're doing a little bit more active. We don't always want to just statically hang out in these positions, but make it more active, gain range of motion, work for it, because that will really last for you for the months and years to come. Now, as we wrap up here, we'll get to questions in the raffle here in a second. Key thing to understand, tightness is subjective. It does not always mean stretching is the solution. A lot of this, I talked about strength, endurance, removing whatever position you're being in, improve your form, how you're lifting up boxes, how you're running, those things. If you have good mechanics overall, typically we tend not to tighten up as much because we have better function of the body. Range of motion, neuromuscular strength, stability, all go hand in hand. Let's stop just assuming we need to stretch. Let's address all of these components together, and that's where a good, well-rounded program really comes into play. Be more objective. Investigate what ranges of motion you actually use on a daily basis, what's restricted, right? We want to understand that in a more black and white manner rather than, hey, my hamstrings feel tight. Okay, great. Are they? Okay. We need to figure out the answer to that because that's going to lead us move us forward in the right direction there rather than wasting our time. And then do the CARs, controlled articular rotations, do those drills, move into your restricted positions every single day. Rather than saying, I'm tight, what do I do? What is the position that's tight? Can you just hold in that position for a period of time, right? We overcomplicate this process quite a bit. It is actually very simple. Go to the threshold of that tightness. Don't force yourself through it. Back off a centimeter, right? Do that every single day. As that gives a little bit more, you push a little bit more, and then you back off a centimeter. You slowly expand that range of motion, and then you move through that range of motion, right? It's a very easy process. Stop guessing, start assessing, right? Get an evaluation, perform a self-assessment in some way. This will allow you not to waste your time. Everyone wants to stretch. Hey, what do I do to cool down? Give me some stretch. People say all the time, give me some stretches for the lower body or the shoulders. I don't know. I have no idea what you need, Ideally, you need nothing. Do you need to stretch? Are you doing it just because you think you need to do it? Is it actually limiting your movement and your daily activities in some way? Or what is the issue? What are we trying to address here with that rather than thinking we need to do something just to do it? Can you remove something in the process that will eliminate that tightness, right? I'd rather you do that than to just add 30 minutes, an hour of static stretching, which is probably not going to solve anything besides give you a short-term more temporary relief or improvement in flexibility or reduction in tightness. Now, to get us wrapped here, 1 second, I need to change my screen just so I can see it. Enter the raffle. Like I mentioned before, going to raffle off the entry into the 6-week program. This will be January 10th. So perfect time for the new year for those of you looking for something to really kick off the year. Focus on health, fitness, wellness, nutrition, right? We're going to incorporate a lot of these other areas into this program to be a very well-rounded program, but focus on function of the body in addition to fitness. Achieve your goals, but to move better, understand what your weak links are, and incorporate more of a longevity approach to your program. So if you're interested in entering the raffle, I'm going to put a poll up on the screen. Hopefully you see that depending on how you're watching the webinar today. Yes or no? Do you want to enter the raffle for 1 free entry? We'll set up a call just to talk about it. If it's something that works for you, great. If it's not, no hard feelings in any way. But just want to make sure, and actually what I'm going to do here for a second, I'm going to grab a link. So I'm going to give you guys a second. I'm also going to grab a link. for you. In addition to the raffle, and we'll close that out here in a second. I think we have most people. We'll give one more second for someone else to enter. Any of my current people, if you want to talk about this, we can talk about jumping into that program. It's going to be pretty good. I don't have a lot of details out now. It's not finalized. The registration page isn't up and running yet, but it will be shortly. We can talk about it more. All right, so let's close that down. Close that down. All right, then if nothing changes, right? So your goal, your job now moving forward, I cannot do this for you. I'm your tour guide throughout all this, is to do something. If you do what you always did, you get what you always got. Time to change that. Change what you're doing, add something into the mix that's going to address this, right? Mix something up in some way. Some of you might still need assistance moving forward. I'm putting a link here in the chat. Write a note to you. This is a 30-minute customization call. If you're interested in talking about these things, again, I don't go into these as a sales pitch in disguise. Want to help you, know I can help you one-on-one. It's not a fit for everyone. But if you are interested in just discussing, talking over the webinar, understanding, and let me know your background, your injury history, what you're struggling with, I can help you fine tune some of these to the best degree possible, which a lot of people need help with. It's a very confusing topic. As you can see, it's hard to really understand what do I need in terms of flexibility and tightness and range of motion. But hopefully we can help you eliminate the unnecessary and really focus down. If one of my programs work for you, I'm happy to tell you about that, whether it's working one-on-one in some way, the functional or fitness program, I'll tell you that. But my goal is just to help you be more guided moving forward. So you can actually use this webinar, not just to learn stuff and then to go about your Sunday afternoon, but to use this to learn from it and actually take action in a way that's going to help you long-term. So I appreciate you guys. I'm going to go into the Q&A here in a second. If you have any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A right now. Tomorrow at 11 a.m., for those of you who are not going to stick around for the Q&A, I will send the webinar replay, the name of the raffle winner for the Function Over Fitness program, schedule that customization call. Now's the time. I mean, it's always the time, but I think we're getting to that point in December, January, where we tend to be a little bit more motivated, like, hey, 2022 is going to be different. It's only different if you make it different, right? So let's figure out what you need moving forward, customize these to your needs, and really take action now moving forward rather than having to wait. Now look in your spam folder. If you don't see that tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern time, look in your spam folder because it will most likely be in there. Now, a couple questions to get us rolling into the Q&A. If you cannot stay for whatever reason, I appreciate you joining the webinar. Thanks for sitting here on your Sunday morning, and we definitely look forward to chatting soon. But a couple questions to get us going. People asked about post-run stretching, warm-ups. Obviously, nothing we talked about today. I do have other webinars that talk about that. In terms of a post-run stretch, as needed, right? I would technically probably walk 5 to 10 minutes, do a fitness walk, allow that heart rate to come down, continue to recirculate blood, regardless of whatever activity is, whether it's running, whether it's strength training. I think you're going to see more benefit from walking to keep that heart rate slightly elevated than you are always going into some type of static stretching, especially. I like to improve flexibility within the workout itself. So your strength training would be designed to improve your weak link, hamstring flexibility, hip flexor, back. Like we would do exercise that strengthen and improve that range of motion. So at that point, we generally don't have to do a lot of post-workout stretching, but walking is really your best bet. Patty asked, improve range of motion, address chronic pain, right? This is something we need to look into more. Technically, depending on what the issue is, the cars, the pails and rails, if designed the right way with a good rehab program, could be a very strong thing for you, but we really got to get specific on that to what you need, because that's a whole other can of worms. We start talking about chronic pain and injury. Patty, got marching orders from my physical medicine rehab doc to stretch daily. Want to learn stretches in addition to my basic stretches. Again, understanding what you actually need. So from your evaluation with PT, thanks Beth Ann, thanks for joining. Hope the snowshoeing and the skiing went well this weekend. So in addition to what your body is telling you, right? We don't need to stretch everything. I think that's the common misconception is I need to stretch after I run. I need to stretch on a daily basis. I need to do this. You only need what you need. How much range of motion do you need? What is the issue? More often than not, I don't see stretching flexibility being the main issue. In a couple key areas, that's the case, but a lot of times strength, stability, improving movement quality, progressively loading tissues to be able to handle the stress, the demands of the activities that you're placing upon them. Those are kind of the most important things. So it's hard to say, but hopefully some of these allow you to understand how to do some of your stretching mobility a little bit differently. Carrie L said how to override the neuromuscular system, similar to Beth Ann there. I think we add more of a contractile component to some of our mobility. We don't just aimlessly stretch to stretch. We don't just hold tissues in a lengthened position. So no, Carrie L, I think we talked about being an athletic trainer in the past. I think more like PNF type stuff, using exercises to correct imbalances, looking for asymmetries, looking for imbalances, strength, stability, improving compensations. I think all those things will help naturally override the neuromuscular system. I think if we continue to crank on muscles and tissues, that's when our body is just like resistant to getting more range of motion. So we do it more of in an active way to teach ourselves it's okay to move into that position. That's what I see tend to work a little bit better. Lynn, I struggle to make time to stretch. Any pointers are great. If you need it, you need it. Like I'm very, the way I work with people is if you tell me you want something and it matters to you, you're going to do it. So if you actually need a stretch and that matters in some way, you just got to do it, right? There's nothing else to motivate to do. I think simplifying as much as possible. We're always trying to do more than we need because we think more is better, when in reality less is more. If I do 6 stretches every single day, but only 3 of them address my problem areas, I'd rather spend that 30 minutes doing 3 stretches for longer, adding this active component, than doing 6 stretches when only 3 of them matter to me personally. So that's one of the biggest things that I think about with my clients' programs is how do I cut this down to what's simple, right? I don't want you to be doing too much. Sometimes you need to put in the work. It's going to take you an hour to get through this routine. You need that right now. However, other points, can I simplify as much as possible to give you only what you need? And you just do that on a consistent basis to get better. So I think simplify and also understand what that is you're looking for, rather than saying, hey, I need a stretch. What do you need to stretch? Why you need to stretch it? Is there anything else that will also help you address that in the process? Anything else? I apologize if I got this name backwards. Lockett Sherry, or if it's Sherry Lockett. How to keep the knots away. So you'll tend to see knots in tissues that are compensating, tissues that are being taxed beyond their means. So if I think about this right here is your, sorry, it's blurry, I think, with the thing. This right here is your hamstring muscle. This is a glass, right? I fill water into the glass. The hamstring of this container can only handle so much stress. If I continue to pour water into this, it overflows. That's where your trigger points, that's when you're knots, that's when that comes in. Poor movement quality, poor strength, poor range of motion, poor endurance, compensation in some way. Those are the things that tend to overfill the glass. So understanding what it is you need to do. Do you need to strengthen that tissue? Does that tissue need more range of motion? Do you need to improve your movement quality or the activities you're doing on a daily basis? Are you sitting at a desk in this position where naturally my upper back, my rhomboids, my mid trap, my traps, all those things will tend to develop these trigger points and things? Can I improve that position and strengthen out of that position rather than continuing to stretch because that feels better? Those things will naturally improve knots, trigger points, and those things. So you really need to understand why, but usually from that standpoint, foam rolling to a degree, which is very short-lived, the results, some mobility, stretching, active as much as possible, what we talked about, and then strengthening the heck out of your tissues. The muscles that are the strongest tend to break down the least, right? They can handle the most amount of stress. So the stronger we are, the better endurance we have, the less our tissues are forced to their limit. So strengthening is one of the most important things you can do when we talk about trigger points and knots and all of that. And that's it. That should be everything in terms of questions. If anyone else has any questions here, feel free to drop it real quick. I'm going to get you guys wrapped up on time. Perfect for today. So it's a beautiful day out here in Michigan, blue skies and 46 degrees. So I'm going to get out myself and go for a run and hit the gym here pretty soon and spend a couple hours doing that. So I appreciate you guys. Thanks for taking the time to join the webinar today. I hope you learned something. And if you have any questions, schedule that customization call, look into the Function Over Fitness Challenge. Let's talk about those things and let's get to work more importantly. All right, guys, have a good Sunday. I'll talk to you soon.